Okay, so we're going to look at how to edit floors using the different floor editing tools. Okay, so to do this example, I was just showing on the board that typically where you would see this is when you were actually showing the slope in a floor. So if you're doing like a really big slab or something like that and you actually have like drainage to particular areas of a floor, this would be where you would actually use that. Okay, so I've drawn just a basic square in our in this concrete floor that I've created. Okay, so I'm going to go to level 1 floor plan to look at this, and I'm going to click on that floor, and let's look at what some of these shape editing tools actually do. Everyone here should be understanding what the edit boundary option. That's just how we create the floor. So you can make that in any shape that you want. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark, and then from here I'm going to, let's look at some of these different options here. So if I click on modify sub-elements, okay, what this allows us to do is, let's say we want one of the edges of our floor to slope in one particular direction. Okay, so I clicked on modify sub-elements, and then from here I'm going to click on just any one of these lines. Okay, let's start with one of the lines. So I click on that line and you get a little dimension here that pops up, 0, 0. So if I change that to, let's say, 6 inches. Okay, I change that to 6 inches, and then I double click outside of my screen, or actually I just hit escape twice, and I now go back over to this floor slab. You'll notice that the edge of that, if I look at it in, let's look at it in pure elevation, is actually sloped. So it actually took the slope to whatever that dimension that I added to it was. Okay, so if I go back to this and I hit modify sub-elements, again I could click on this. Right now it says it's up 6 inches. I can change that back to 0. I can change that to -1 foot, whatever it needs to be, and it will alter that floor into whatever direction that you want. Okay, so another thing that you could do, instead of selecting one of these lines, is I can also select one of these points. Okay, let's say that I wanted all of the drainage to go down to this particular corner. I can change that to -6 inches. Okay, and now the entire floor slab actually slopes over to that corner. Okay, it's kind of hard to see, but it is actually doing it. Okay, so it's a lot more dramatic if you do something like 3 feet. Okay, now it's saying that the thickness of the floor may become slightly inaccurate due to extreme shape editing. You wouldn't, I mean, one, you wouldn't even be able to form concrete like that, or it'd be extremely, extremely challenging. But I'm just kind of exaggerating it so that you guys can see how that works. Okay, so that's the modify sub-elements tool. Let's look at a couple of the other options. Okay, let's say you wanted to add a floor drain to the center of this slab. Okay, maybe you're doing something like a bathroom. Okay, bathroom for a locker room, and you have a floor. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on add point. So I'm going to click on add point, and I'm going to place that point in the middle of my floor. Okay, now I'm just kind of eyeballing this of where the middle would be. You would actually take some time to actually calculate where exactly that would be. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the middle. Okay, I'm going to hit escape 1 time. Okay, and now if I go back and I click on my floor and I click on edit sub-elements, I can now click on that dot, and I'm going to say maybe -6 inches. Okay, now I actually have, if I go to 3D, I now have the slope of that floor all draining to the center. Okay, or wherever you place that line. So typically, if you're an architect and you're doing like floor drainage details or something like that, there's usually some rhyme or reason why you're selecting all of the locations that you are. It's not always to the center, it could be in wherever location you want. But basically by using the add point tool, it allows you to pick the datum point of where you want that drain to be located, and it'll automatically create those, it'll automatically break the slab as needed to have that slope go to that location. Okay, so, and let's say you actually wanted to show that slope. What is the slope of that line? I could go up to annotate. This is where the spot, let's see, where is it? Spot slope would become handy. So you'd be showing here in your construction documents, I can now click on that and it's telling you that that slope is that dimension. Okay. Let's just back up a little bit. Okay, so let's look at some other tools. Let's look at what add split line is. So if I click on add split line, It's just like add point, but I'm actually going to define a line, okay? So from here, let's say that I want 3/4 of this slab to be at one elevation, and then maybe I only want the last quarter to actually slope. So I'm going to draw a split line at any location. You guys can determine where that is. I'm just kind of picking a random one. I'm going to draw that line. I'm going to hit escape, okay? I'm now going to select that slab, and I'm going to click on modify subelements. And then from here, I can, let's say I want to lower this side 6 inches. It will lower that 6 inches, but it's going to pivot at that line that I just created. Okay, see how that's happening? I added a split line so that I'm determining where that slope would actually start to occur. Okay, so we're not going to have any instances in our residence to where you would actually need to do this, but for those of you that work in the industry, you will likely incur times when you actually need to do something like that. Okay, so that's it. I'm not going to look at the PICC supports. What that means is that, let's say you had a beam running underneath your slab, you could actually just click on PICC supports, select that beam, and it would put a split line where that would be. So where this, a really good example of where this becomes really applicable is, and actually I did this a ton, is when I was actually designing the parking structure at Broadway Plaza. And so the parking structure at Broadway Plaza is like a 1/4 mile long. It's actually not that long. It's probably like 300 or 400 yards long. And the concrete slab and the parking structure is just absolutely massive. I mean, it's just absolutely huge. Well, there's all kinds of drainage points all over. There's probably like 100 drains in this parking structure. So we actually had to specify on our floor plan how the drainage worked in that parking structure. So sometimes it might slope at a beam, so it gets to a slope, it might go down, then it hits another beam, and then it goes back up, etc., etc. So it's a good example of where you would actually use those tools very frequently. Okay, so that is the modify sub-elements tool when modifying floors. Okay. The next tool that we're going to use is we're going to learn how to create reference plane. I'm going to show you the basic way to create reference planes today in terms of, in terms of placing columns and placing beams. It'll actually become more apparent though when we actually create our sloped roof. So we're going to look at kind of the basic level of creating reference lines today, and we're going to look at a more advanced level, I think, next class. Okay. So if we scroll down, it says to use reference planes to define column locations. And so luckily, it gives you the dimensions of where those column locations will be. Okay, so the reason why we use reference planes is it allows you to see that line, but it's not a printable layer. Okay, so you can put as many reference planes all you want, all over your floor plan, all over your elevations, your sections, whatever you want, and they're never going to print. They're just there for your visual reference. Okay, so sometimes I use detail lines as well, but detail lines will actually show if you leave them there. Okay, if you're in a good habit of putting the detail line down, using it as reference, and then just deleting it, that's okay too. But reference planes are usually kind of the ideal way to do that. So let's create a couple reference planes. The first one that we're going to create is 7 feet 4 3/4 of an inch off the face of our exterior wall. Okay, so I'm going to go over to level 1. There it is. And I am going to go over to architecture, and I'm going to go all the way down to reference plane. Okay, and then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my pick lines tool, and I am going to do an offset of 7 feet, what is it, 3 3/4, 3.75 inches, and enter. And then from there, I'm going to pick the exterior face of my wall, and I'm going to have that reference plane. And from there, I can select it. I can drag it out to however long I need it to be. Okay. Remember, because this is a reference plane, you're not going to see that. You'll see it in all of your floor plans. You'll see it on your sheets, but it's not going to print. So the nice thing about this reference plane is that it's actually a 3D element. Okay. So if I look at this line that I just created and I go to my 3D view, you're not going to see it there. But let's say we go over to this elevation right here. I'm going to click on this elevation and notice that we still see that reference plane. We see it in the vertical dimension. So it's not just a two-dimensional element, it's three-dimensional. So when you draw that line, you're actually drawing a vertical plane, okay? So, and this will make sense in terms of placing columns today, but it'll make a lot more sense when we actually start to draw our diagonal roof next class. Okay, so I'm going to go back to level 1. That's our first reference plane. And if you click on it, you can actually name it if you want. So you could say something like column grid. Okay, so we call that column grid. Okay, so the next step is we're going to draw another one that is 7 feet 10 3/4 off our exterior face over here. So I'm going to go over to reference plane, and that's not what I want. I'm not going to put set, I'm going to click on draw, so I'm going to click on reference plane, and I'm going to match this 10 feet, or well, it's not 10 feet, it was 17 feet. Let's see, 17 feet 10 3/4, so I'm going to type in 17 feet 10.75. Good. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use this line. I'm going to go ahead and, so I can see that little, everyone see that little blue dash line over here? That's telling me where that is. I'm going to go ahead and click right there. I like that. I'm going to go ahead and drag it out like so. And we got that reference plane. Okay, so that actually kind of works like a column grid. Okay, it kind of like works like a column grid, but we're not actually going to see those grid lines in our floor plan. So our next one we're going to create is 18 feet 5.5. So from here, I'm actually just going to select this one grid right here, and I'm just going to copy it over 18 feet 5.5 inches. Okay, so that's our second one. And our last one, 27 feet 10.5. Again, I'm just going to copy this over 27 feet 10.5 inches. Okay, so we've created a couple reference lines that are going to take the place, or actually going to tell us where our columns are going to be located. It looks like there's one more that's just right off the edge of our building down here. Okay, let's get rid of these. I don't need these anymore. And I'm going to draw one more. So architecture, reference plane, and I'm going to draw that reference plane like so. Okay, and these intersections of these reference planes are going to be the locations of our columns. Okay, so if we go to the next step, we've drawn our reference planes. We're going to go ahead and drop in columns 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what we're going to do is we're going to choose architectural columns. Now the difference between architectural columns and then structural columns, which you'll have the options of placing both, is architectural columns are very basic. They're just like squares, circles, or they're just basically extruded squares or extruded cylinders. Okay, so if you're looking for a more simplistic look. Now if you click on structural column, you can actually add any type of structural member, whether it be like a 2x6 wood stud, whether it be like a C channel, whether it be an H channel, whether it be whatever you want, any type of actual structural element that exists in real life. Okay, and we're going to learn how to upload both of those. But let's first do our rectilinear columns. So I'm going to go over to architecture, and I'm going to go to column, and I'm going to click on architectural column. So by default, it gives you a couple to pick from, an 18-inch, 18 by 24, and 24 by 24. I'm going to go to edit type, and I'm going to create my own to create the 5.5-inch column that it says in the prompt. So if I'm going to create a 5.5-inch column, what would be the first step that I would do that? Duplicate, right. So I'm going to duplicate this, and let's call this 5.5-inch by 5 point, or actually you could just call it 5 by 5 rectangular column. Okay, so I hit OK. I'm going to go down to the bottom. The dimensions are going to be 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches. Okay, if you want to add a material, you can do that. So if you want the column to be red, or you want the column to be some specific material, you can do that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as the default for now. All right, and then from there, I can go over to my my placement. So the height, what do I want that to go up to? Let's see what it says here. I think it's from level 1 up to level 3. We also have a couple other constraints. So level 1 minus 2 feet and then level 3 up to -6. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and say, is it level 1? So let's make the height of this actually up to level 3. Okay, and I'm going to place that. Okay, I'm just going to place it in an arbitrary location, and then from there I'm going to select the center of it, and I'm going to snap to the center of that grid line that I just selected. So now if I select that column, I can actually adjust all of our constraints as it says in the prompt. So we have level 1 -2 feet, -2 feet, and then it's going to go up to level 3 -6 inches. Okay, and I'm going to hit apply. I think this one's going to be the same as number 2, same as number 3, and same as number 4. So from here, I can go ahead and click on copy. I'm going to click on multiple, okay, multiple, so that I can copy them all, boom, 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 versus click, copy, click, copy, click, copy, okay? So from here, I'm going to click on the intersection of my grid lines, or my reference plane lines, and I'm going to go ahead and copy these all over to the other locations. We have 1, 2, and then we have 3 and 4. It looks like the third one is right at, come on now. I don't know why it wouldn't go over there. Let's try moving it. Here we go. And this one, I'm going to go ahead and copy it, but instead of from the center, it's going to need to abut the edge of the patio that we created below. Okay, so now if we go to our 3D view, I can see the columns that we had just created. Okay, this one now is integrated into this patio, and to be honest, if I looking at this the way that it is, oh, never mind. I forgot. This is actually going to support both this patio, but it's also going to support the overhang that we're going to create, I think, next class. So even though it looks kind of funny right now, that's okay. All right, same thing with this one. This one, I think this is also going to support an overhang a little bit later. I may actually end up altering this as I go through. I don't know if that's actually the way that I want that to look. It looks a little bit off, but that's okay. That at least shows you guys how to place those columns. Okay, so the next step, if we scroll down, we're going to look at how to create beam systems. Okay, and what this is if you want to create like an actual system or a network of beams on your structure, this would be the tool that you want to do that. Okay, so what it says, it says the first step is to go down, and before clicking on the beam system though, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to upload that 2x10 beam. So if you don't upload it, this is what will happen. If you go over to, I'm going to create the beam system for this second level up here. Okay, so I'm going to go up to level 2, and I'm going to click on structure, and then I'm going to click on beam system. Okay, so the first step to creating the beam system is you're just like when you're creating a floor, is you're going to want to define the location of that system. So I'm going to want to match the floor assembly that I already have. So I'm going to go ahead and trace that floor assembly that we've already created. Okay, I think it goes to here, and then it goes down. And it comes over here, and then it comes down over here, and then like that. Okay, that's a little bit off. Let's just snap that to the edge of my wall. So I've defined the outer perimeter of that beam system. Okay, let's look at some of the different options that we have to editing our beam system. So if we go over to the prompt, it says the elevation of it is minus 1.5 inches. The reason why it says minus 1.5 inches is because technically the top of our floor is at 0, 0. So they're actually assuming in this prompt that our actual hardwood floor, or the plywood and the hardwood floor above our floor framing is 1.5 inches thick. That's why it's saying negative 1.5 inches. Okay, so it's saying
the 0, 0 at the top of the floor, right?
Exactly. So let me just draw that real quick. So if you're looking at this floor assembly in section, right now everyone's floor assemblies is probably like 12 inches thick or 8 inches thick, so it's real thick. Okay, so the reason why it says minus 1.5 is, let's say that This is the top of our floor in section, okay? So that's at 0, 0, okay? That floor, or that hardwood floor might be, we'll say, a 1/2 inch thick. And then our plywood, we'll say, is 1 inch thick. Okay, so that whole assembly is 1.5 inches. Okay, and then we have our floor framing, which will be below, which is like, 6 inches thick or 8 inches thick or something like that. Okay, so that's why it says what it is. All right, and then down below it says to choose a pattern. We're gonna go ahead and do fixed distance, okay? What that means is it's asking you what is the spacing of the members that are gonna be inside this floor system. Okay, so it says 1 feet 3 3/4. So I'm gonna go ahead and change that to 1 feet 3.75 inches. All right, and then it asks you to select a beam type. Okay, right now the only option is the default option, which is W12 by 26. Okay, so what we're looking for is we are looking for dimensional lumber 2 by 10. So it's saying that our floor structure is going to be 10 inches thick. Okay, so to load that, what we're actually going to need to do is we're going to need to load it. This is why I mentioned it's good to actually load this prior to starting the beam system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this drawing that I just did, I'm going to copy it. Okay, I'm going to go Control C, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go ahead and hit the X. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And then first, you're going to want to go up to, let's see, you're going to want to go over to Beam. All right, you're going to click on Beam, and you're going to go to Edit Type, and we're going to need to load in that wood beam prior. Okay, so by loading in the wood beam, that will allow us to select it from that selection. So I'm going to go over to Load, and I'm going to go down to Structural Framing. Okay, I'm going to click on Structural Framing. I'm then going to go to Wood, because I'm looking for dimensional lumber. I'm going to go to Wood, and then from there I'm going to click on Dimensional Lumber. Okay, so I'm going to click on Dimensional Lumber, and then from there I can select my 2 by 10. See right there? And you can see that you scroll down and you have just about, you do have every type of dimensional lumber that literally exists. Okay, so I'm going to click on 2 by 10. I'm going to hit OK. That loads it into my system, and I'm going to hit OK again. So here's my dimensional lumber. So now, if I go back to Structure and I click on Beam System, remember the clipboard tool that we did? And I did Control C. I'm going to go over to Paste, Align to Current View. So there's that line work that I initially created. So instead of me going through and doing it all over again, I copied it, and then I used my clipboard to bring it back in the exact same location that I did previously. Okay, little shortcut tool, so you don't have to redo your work. And so I do it all the time, where you kind of get so far into a certain step and you're like, oh shoot, I forgot to do something initially. Well, I just copied it, so I don't have to do it again. Okay, so from here I can now change my beam type to dimensional lumber 2'10" or 2 by 10. I'm going to change this to 1 foot 3.75 inches. Actually, you know what? I'm going to change it to about, I'm just going to say 18 inches. That's more realistic on what the spacing of that would actually be in real life. Okay, so 18 inches, 24 inches, that's all pretty standard. Okay, so from here, I'm going to go ahead and hit Apply, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark. Okay, so now if you guys see this, you see all these little dashed lines. That's representational of all of our framing systems. So if I look at this in 3D, okay, you can actually see our framing. Okay, but if I click on it, let's click on the whole system. Come on. Sometimes you could select either the individual members or you can select the entire system. There we go. So we're going to change the elevation to minus 1.5 inches. I'm going to hit Apply. Okay. And I'm going to do a couple more things to get this right. So right now, if I click on this floor structure, typically, when I'm modeling this in like a residential application, I actually don't usually do the actual framing system. So this core that you originally created, when you go to Edit Type, this softwood lumber here, that's equivalent to the same thing. Right now, we're just duplicating that. So if I actually was to, I'm going to create I'm going to click on an edit type. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to create a new one, edit type, and I'm going to make this 0. I'm going to get rid of all of this. Let's see. I'm trying to think of another way to do this. Basically, what I'm trying to create is I'm creating a floor assembly that just has the sheathing and the hardwood floor, so that it goes right on top of the framing system. Okay. So unfortunately, it's going to make me select this. I'm going to make my sheathing the structural component of this. So I'm going to change this to sheathing. And I'm going to get rid of all this, delete, delete. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and delete this one as well. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to hit OK again. And now you'll notice that our flooring system is actually just sitting right on top of our structural framing. Okay, so it's actually a little bit more realistic to what that would actually be in real life. Okay, so you could see that flooring, that framing below here. Yes?
What if you don't want the framing to be going in that particular direction?
Great question. Yep, it's actually not in the correct direction. I know you'd call that out because you always call out the architectural inconsistencies in this house. But if you click on the framing system, we're going to click on, let's see, edit boundary. Okay, and I'm going to go back to my level 2 floor plan. And you're going to notice a button up here that says beam direction. Okay, so right now, all those beam directions are actually, they're all going in this longitudinal direction. So if you want to change them to actually be the other way, I'm just going to simply draw a line going the other direction like so. Okay, and then from there, I'm going to hit the check mark. And if I look at it now in 3D, they'll all be going the opposite direction. Okay? Makes sense? Yeah, that's what we want. I knew you'd like that better. So those are your, that's how you're going to complete the beam system tool. So another tool is actually so right now you see this, you can actually see all of the framing here in this wall. If you wanted to go up to architecture, you could go to floor, you could click on, let's see, what I'm looking for is actually fascia. Where's my fascia tool? Sorry, it's been a while since I've used this one. Structure. Where's my fascia tool? Architecture, floor. Oh, I know, it's on roof, fascia. No, never mind, that's not gonna work. I'm gonna come back to that. But does everyone understand how to use that beam system tool? Okay, and so that becomes really handy if you wanna show all of your floor joists and all your different flooring components. But it also works well if you want to show like steel. All you got to do is just change that dimensional lumber to whatever type of beam that you want. So if you're doing like a really big commercial building and you actually have maybe like a grid of steel columns and you actually have a grid of steel beams, well, instead of drawing them all individually, you can actually just create that beam system and it'll just create that grid of beams. Okay, that makes sense? Yes?
Could you show everybody, like you showed me the other day, how to modify the wall underneath the stairs so it goes in the direction?
Absolutely. So this is probably another thing that some of you guys may have. So I'm going to attach this to the base. Some of you guys, maybe when you're creating your stair, you might have had something like this. Anybody else have that problem? Where the wall is going through the stair? So if you click on that wall, ideally, you should be able to drag that wall down. If you ever don't see that little arrow to drag that wall down, the reason is that you likely, when you created that floor assembly, you probably, when you got that little message that says, would you like to attach all of your walls below to the floor assembly that you're now creating, you probably hit yes. And that's usually a good thing. It attaches all of your first floor walls up to your floor above. Okay, that's usually a good thing. So right now, currently this wall is actually attached to this flooring assembly. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on detach top to base. I'm going to click on my floor assembly. Now you can see that it's no longer attached, and if I want to, I can drag that wall to wherever I need it to be. I'm going to drag it to just below my stair assembly. Okay, so some other things that you could do to actually kind of clean this up a little bit is I could click on this wall. Right now my staircase is actually on the inside of that wall, so that works okay. But for those of you that maybe your stair is actually in line with that wall, which it might be, some of your guys' stair might be in line with the same plane as this wall, what you might do is you might go to Edit Profile, okay, and I'm going to select my Pick Lines tool, and I'm going to select the bottom of that stringer, okay. So then I can go ahead and trim that up, like so, hit the check mark, and that wall will now be on the same, it will now be aligned with the bottom of your stair. So for the way that I drew it, I wouldn't actually want to do that because I actually designed my stair to be inside of this wall down here. But some of you guys, the stair may be in line with that wall. So if it is, that's a good option to kind of trim that wall with your stair assembly. Okay? I'm just going to leave it the way that I had it. Any other questions about that? Good. So that's beam systems. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to learn. You guys have already done this. You can see that I actually did it. I did it a little bit differently in that I actually stopped it right here at the edge of my door. It shows you to go all the way out to below that concrete slab that you created. If you want to do that, that's fine. Up to you. Okay. So last part is you're going to need to create the C channel, okay? And to do that, it actually tells you to activate the temporary view properties. Let's talk about why it asks you to do that. So right now, if I go over to my level 2 floor plan, I currently don't see all of the annotations for the flooring below. So for those of you that maybe do construction documents for a living, typically for all of your structural members in plan, you actually see a dashed line that represents that structural framing so that you know where that is below the floor assembly, okay? So by default, you don't actually see it in Revit. And I actually, in my architectural floor plans, I don't like to, but for a structural floor plan, if you're doing you probably will likely want to show that. So right now, if you go down to detail level, you're probably on coarse or medium. If you're in coarse or in medium, you won't see those framing lines below. But if you go over to if you go over to fine, you should actually be able to see those now. Okay, actually they're below the floor assembly, but you don't actually see them. But let's go ahead and go to level 2, and let's just see the difference between drawing them in medium. So I'm going to go over to structure and beam, and notice that when I draw them, I can see that line, but when I click, I don't actually see that line anymore. Okay, so there's that piece of dimensional lumber that I just created. But if I change this to fine, let's see, why am I not seeing that? I think it's my, I think you're right. I think it is my cut plane. Let's see if I move this up. Let me move this up to 3 feet. Okay, let me look at this now. Okay, so right now I am currently on medium, or let's go to coarse. So when you're in coarse, notice how that structural member shows just as a line, okay? When I change this, which is how your floor plan should be currently, that's the detail level of how your floor plan should be right now. So if I change that to fine or to coarse, you'll actually see that member. Okay, so the reason why it tells you to change your temporary view properties is that because when you're drawing framing, a lot of times it's good to see it as something other than just a line. Because if you're drawing like a big channel that's like 12 inches thick, you actually want to see that entire channel versus just a line that's represented by that member. Okay, so I'm going to go down to these little goggles that says, actually that's not the one I want. I am looking for the enable temporary view properties. So if I go down to this little button right here, it says temporary view properties. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on enable temporary view properties. So the reason why I do that is that now I can change all of these properties down here at the bottom, and it won't affect my floor plan. Okay, my floor plan will stay as I had it, and I don't have to worry about going and changing it all. So if I want to draw some beams and I want to be able to see them, I can go through and I can change this to fine. I could draw all the beams that I want, and then when I'm done, I can go back, click on this, restore view properties, and it'll go back to the way that your floor plan originally was. Okay, so let's look at this last step to the assignment. We're going to be drawing some C channels that are going to be connecting to the different elements that or to the different columns that we created earlier. Okay, you can see here that we have 2 here running in this direction and 2 running in this direction. Okay, it says to draw that using a C channel as C10 by 25. So to get that, we're going to go through that exact same process that we uploaded our dimensional lumber before. Okay, so I'm going to click on beam, and then from there I'm going to go to edit type, load. I'm going to go down to structural framing. I'm then going to go to steel, and then I'm going to click on C channel. Okay, I'm going to click on open, and I can then find the one that it asked for. So C10 by 25. So C10 by 25, there it is. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. It will load it. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK again. And then from here, I'll go ahead and turn on my I'm going to go ahead and turn on my, oops, that's not what I want. My temporary view properties, enable temporary view properties. I'm going to turn these to fine so that I can see the channel that I'm drawing. Okay, and I'm going to go up to structure. I'm going to click on beam, make sure that we have the channel that we want. Okay, and I'm going to draw them. So the first one is going to be, let's just double check this again. It shows one basically straddling the face of the column on this side, and it shows one straddling the face of the column on this side. And it's saying that the offset from the center of that column, or the offset from the reference plane that we created, is 3 inches. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see, where's my beam? Let's go to modify beam. I'm going to click on the pick lines tool. I'm going to change the, where is that? Right there. I should be able to type in my offset. Pardon me if I'm a little slow on this. I actually never have to draw a structure. I know how to use all the tools, but I just don't do it a ton in my actual job. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and use the pick lines tool. I'm going to select my reference plane like so. Okay, and what it did is it just drew a beam in the exact same location of that reference plane. Okay, so if I go up to the top, you'll see here that we have a beam that is now going through the middle of our column. So from here, I can actually move this over. I'm going to move it so that the face of it is touching the face of my column, and I'm going to change the constraints. Okay, so I'm going to go up to edit Workplane, and I'm going to change this to level 3 as it says in the prompt. Okay, notice that is now at the top. If I look at this in pure elevation, it should be right on the edge. I think it also said to change, let's see, level 3, 0, 0. I think our column is actually just a little bit short. Okay. I think that looks better. Okay, so we have a column. It's running through a bunch of our walls. That's okay. That'll end up being fixed once we actually place our roof a little bit later. Oops. Let's look at this at the top view. This is actually way too long. I'm going to make this shorter, about like that. And I'm going to let this one kind of stick out on this side, about like that. Okay, so let me go back to my site plan. So from here, notice that all I see is a line right now. Okay, so if I turn on those temporary view properties again, and I change that to fine, I can now see that beam that I just created. I'm going to want to place that beam in the exact same position on the other side of my column. So I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to use my mirror tool. Okay, so mirror by pick axis. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to use that reference plane that we created as the axis. Okay, and now I have both of my beams. Okay, both of my beams like so. I can go back to my 3D view, and you can see that I have the beam to now match as it's shown. Okay, and if you want to change the material of that, if you want it to be something that's, let's say, red, I could go up to edit type, and let's see, actually, sorry, I don't even need to click on edit type, do I? I'm going to click on that beam, and I'm going to go over to right here under materials and finishes. It says steel ASTM A36. I'm going to change that to, I'm just going to duplicate this. I'm going to call this red, so the material is still steel. I'm going to go up to appearance. I'm going to duplicate the asset, but I'm going to add a tint, and I'm going to make that red. So now we have red steel. Okay. See how I did that? Do the same thing to the other one. Okay. Everybody see how that works? Good? Okay. I'll draw my last couple. I think we have a couple going in the other direction as well. Looks like it's attached to this tall column that we originally created, and it goes through and it fastens to this concrete column that we created over here on this side. So I'm going to go up to, I'm actually going to use my site plan. I like to use the site plan just because right now I currently have a little bit better view of everything that's going on in here. So what I'll do is I'm going to go up to beam, and I'm going to start right here at the edge of my beam, make sure we have the right channel. Reference level, I'm going to make that level 3. Okay. I'm going to start by drawing that beam all the way through, and I'm going to attach it to this wall. Let's see, where are you, Mr. Beam? Let's see, why isn't it showing? Oh, well, for whatever reason it's down here. I thought I selected level 3, but let's see. Edit work plane, I'm going to change that to level 3. Hit OK. It should go up. Here we go. So if it ever doesn't go into the right position that you want, always just click on Edit Work Plane to make sure that the correct work plane is selected. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my site plan. Okay, we have our temporary view properties turned on, which is good. I'm going to kind of extend that a little bit and use the same tool. I'm going to click on that beam, and I'm going to go over to mirror. I'm going to select my, actually I don't have a grid, I actually don't have a reference plane in this particular option, so what tool would you use? Right here, right next to mirror pick axis, I'm going to click on mirror draw axis. Okay, so I'm going to draw in the axis that I want to mirror over, and I'm just going to use the center of my column. Okay, so I'm going to draw that axis, and it will mirror it over to the other side of that column.
What if we pick the edge of the column, the other edge of the column?
You could, but technically you want to mirror it over the center of the column. So you won't, that won't work. Because if you mirror it over the edge, watch, let's just try it. If I click on that column or that beam, and I click on mirror, and yes, you could select the edge of that beam, but notice that it's way over there.
Okay.
So if you really wanted to, you could move it, but you could be a little bit more efficient with that. Okay? All right, makes sense. We have our beams. We could see our channels. Starting to get some of these kind of nifty architectural details. Change this to red. Yeah, I think actually it says in the exercise to make these columns. Actually, that is in the correct location, I think. But I'm going to go ahead and make this not -6. I'm going to change that to 0. And I'm actually going to take this one right here, and I'm going to click on Attach Top to Base. I'm going to click my floor assembly. Notice that that column is now attached to the bottom of our balcony. So that actually structurally is starting to make a little bit more sense, even though I think ideally this column wants to be at least attached to that in some fashion, but that's okay. I'm going to do the same thing to this one, Attach Top to Base. Click on that. and we're in business. Okay? So that's the end of the residence part. What are we on? Part 6 now? So that's the end of the residence part 6. And what you'll want to do is continue to follow the prompts. I think you're going to want to create a new PDF of the same images that you guys have been using. So upload your floor plans, so levels 1 and 2. If you have elevations created, go ahead and use those. You've probably already created perspectives, so you're just going to replot the views that you guys have already created and upload them to Canvas. All right? Yes?
Quick question. How did you change the Workplane?
How did I change the Workplane? Okay, so I think for whatever reason, these columns were a little bit lower. So I clicked on Edit Workplane right here. Okay, and I'm going to click on that, and before it was at level 1. Okay, so our columns were showing up down here, so I clicked on the column. So if you have the same problem, you can just click on the column, click on Edit Workplane, and then select the Workplane to be level 3. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
You will be just in that elevation. Can you change it, for example, to 0 and we'll switch on that?
You can do it from any floor plan, any section, from any view you want. You can select that. You can select that beam, and you can edit the work plane.
I think we didn't do this floor. Is it the structure?
For the beam system?
No, the floor here. This extension of the floor.
What are you trying to do? Sorry.
We didn't do that.